How you doing there? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf 10. Daf Yud, Daf 10. Masechta Avodah Zarah. Friends. Yo, friends. So in today's Daf, the first part of the Daf, we continue the discussion of dating documents from the beginning of the Greek rule. Exciting times. And then we move on in our Mishnah to more pagan festivals, specifically when the day that the king becomes king, and then we that leads to a discussion, the story of the relationship between Antoninus and Rebbe, the Emperor Antoninus and Rebbe. So here we go. We're going to start on Daf Tes Omid Beis, all the way at the bottom. Shis Shnin Yiserto. Oh, so there was a document, and on the document there was a date, and that date was off by 6 years. So if today's 2025, it says 2031. Okay, it says 2031. Yeah, it's confusing, but yeah, 2031. Yeah, exactly. So it was off by 6 years. So Sofer Abon Kame de Rav Nachman lemeimar Aishtar meucher hu. So the people that were there with Rav Nachman, they were of the impression that it's a shtar me'ocher, right? If we just use, let's say, 2025, right, all of a sudden we see a document that says it's dated 2031. So they figured, okay, it's a shtar me'ocher. What's a shtar me'ocher? We learned all about that in Masechta, I think, Gittin, Masechta Bava Metzia. I think those are the places with maybe Bava Kama. But we've learned about shtar me'ochers. Shtar me'ochers are, well, be'etzim, if Shimon lends Reuven $1,000, and Reuven writes a document saying, hey, I owe you $1,000, and if Reuven defaults, so then Shimon can collect from Reuven. Shimon can collect from Reuven's properties. And if Reuven in the meantime sells his properties to somebody else, then let's say to Levi, so Shimon can go and collect from Levi. So now if that date though is postponed, right? So if we use like 2025, but Shimon's document says 2031, it means that he can't collect from you can only collect from properties. Well, you can only collect basic. Well, of course, you can collect the loan from Reuven when it's due, right? But if Reuven doesn't have the money, so then Shimon is going to collect, and Reuven has sold property to Levi, so then Shimon goes and collects from Levi. But if the date on the document is only 2031, well, he can only start collecting from properties post the date on the document. So only property that Reuven sold to Levi after 2031. That's a shtar me'ocher. Right, that the date is later on, which means that basically delays the option for Shimon to be able to collect. So there was this document that was basically 6 years off. So the rabbis that were with Rav Nachman, they figured, okay, sounds like a shtar me'ocher. Basically means that Shimon can't collect for another 6 years, right, until the date on the document. Omer Lu Rav Nachman says to them, "Hi Safra Dukno Kasvei." No, that is not what's going on. It is not a shtar me'ocher. Rather, what is going on is that the scribe, the one who wrote this document, was a very meticulous scribe. Banachshis shnin de malchu be'elam. And what's the dealio with these 6 years? These are the 6 years that the Greeks ruled in Elam before their kingdom spread globally. The Anan, their empire, spread globally. The Anan lo chashvinon lehu, that we don't consider these 6 years who kachashiv leu v'zimnei kasvei. But this scribe is very meticulous, and he even counts those years, and that's the deal with the 6-year discrepancy, right? As we mentioned yesterday, right, that scribes would start their counting of the years, right? So let's say 2025 is, let's just say it's from the beginning, 2025 years since the beginning of the Greek rule, let's just say, right? Year 0 was the beginning of the Greek rule. Now, the thing is that generally speaking, right, that would, you see, really the Greek rule started 6 years prior, actually. The thing is, generally speaking, the scribes only start counting from the beginning of, they consider the beginning of the Greek rule to be 6 years into their rule, once their empire really expanded globally. However, this scribe was particularly meticulous, which led him to actually begin counting from literally when they started their rule, even when it was limited to a place called Elam, and that was 6 years prior. Which means that, if we're let's say saying that 2025 means 2025 years since the beginning of the Greek rule, well, this scribe actually considered it to be 6 years prior, which is why he's actually got another 6 years on it, because he started counting 6 years prior. So it's according to his counting, it's 2031 years since the beginning of the rule. So actually, Rav Nachman says, look, this is just a very meticulous scribe, and he started counting literally from the beginning of their rule, but it means 2025. Okay, it's the same date, and therefore it is not a shtar mocher, and Shimon can already start collecting from this year already. Givaldic. The Tanis will learn in a Braise. Rabbi Yossi says, Rabbi Yossi Sheshana Mochu be'Elam, that for the first 6 years of the Greek rule, it was limited to a place called Elam. But after that, after those first 6 years, Pashta Malchusim B'chol Olam Kulei, their empire expanded globally. Maskefla Rav Acha Bar Yaakov, Rav Acha Bar Yaakov asked a kasha on this. That meaning, this whole discrepancy of this whole 6 year discrepancy thing. This is assuming that we're counting from the beginning of the Greek rule, okay? And the Greek rule has this interesting aspect to it, which is that, there's this question of when we really consider it to have started. Do we consider it to have started literally on day one, or 6 years later? There's this interesting 6 year thing. But who's it? Rav Acha Bar Yaakov asked an interesting kasha though. And what's interesting about this kasha is, when did the Yidden receive? When did the Yidden leave Egypt? In what year? Who can tell me in what year the Yidden left Egypt? The answer to that question is, well, we saw it, I think it was yesterday. We saw that, they left Egypt in the same year that they received the Torah at Mount Sinai, 49 days later. And that year was 2448. What was the year that the Greek Empire expanded globally? 3448, exactly 1,000 years later, right? We said yesterday that the second temple was destroyed in the year 3828, right? We said yesterday that the second temple was destroyed in the year 3828. Also, the second temple lasted for 420 years, okay? Which means if we back up 420 years, then that would be when the year that the second temple was built. So let's see if we could do that. Do a little bit of math in our heads. Not so simple, but let's give it a shot. So 3828, go back 400 years, that would be 3428, right? 3828 minus 400 is 3428. And then it's 420, right? So 3428. So then that becomes 3408. And the Greeks, we're saying, began ruling, the global empire was 40 years later, which was, 3408 plus 40 is 3448. Okay, so we said that Yetzias Mitzrayim was in the year 2448, and the Greeks began ruling in the year 3448. So Rav Acha Bar Yaakov asked an interesting question, which is, how do you know that actually the date for the scribes is from the beginning of the Greek rule? Maybe it's from Yetzias Mitzrayim, actually, and they just dropped 1,000. So Keilu, if we're talking about, we're saying that it's been, in the year 15 or something. How do we know that it's 15 years from the beginning of the Greek rule in 3448? Maybe it's from 15 years from Yetzias Mitzrayim, which was in 2448, and we just dropped 1,000. So instead of saying year 1015, we just say it's year 15, It just dropped 1,000. So how do we, and what's the big difference also here? The big difference is, well, if we're counting from the Greeks, well, then there's this weird kind of like 6-year period. Like, do we start counting from the first 6 years, which would be 3-4-4-2, or is it 6 years later in 3-4-4-8? There's this weird question. But if it's Yitzias Mitzrayim, then there's no question. If it's from Yitzias Mitzrayim, so it's from the year 2448, and that's that. In which case, there's no weird 6-year question. In which case, if there's a discrepancy of 6 years, it's a shtar me'ocher. There's no other way to explain it. So that's Rav Acha's Bar Yaakov's kasha. Okay, so Maskef Rav Acha Bar Yaakov asked the kasha, how do we know that we're counting from the Greeks, in which case there's this question of, what's the deal with the 6 years? Is it this? Is it that? Maybe the years that are counted are from when the Yidden left Egypt. And they dropped the first 1,000 years, and we're basically counting starting from the second 1,000 years. Okay. And if we're going to do that, we end up projecting this, but if we're going to do that, well, then there's no other way to account for this 6-year discrepancy. It must be just, a shtar me'ocher, a document that its date is in the future. Right, a date that's later than the actual event that it's describing. Okay. So meaning in the case of a loan, it's saying that the loan happened later on, and then it's a shtar me'ocher. Fine. Omar Rav Nachman ba'goyla ein mon ela lemalche Yevonim bilvad. Rav Nachman answers Rav Acha Bar Yaakov. He says, well, in the Golus outside of Eretz Yisrael, we count from the beginning of the Greek rule, and that is that. And therefore, there is this question of the 6 years. What is it? Now, Rav Acha Bar Yaakov thought that Rav Nachman was simply brushing him off. He's blowing him off. Right? Rav Acha Bar Yaakov came with an interesting question. Is it from the Greeks? Maybe it's from Yitzias Mitzrayim. Rav Nachman's like, meh. In Bagola, we go from the Greeks. Get out of here. That's at least how Rav Acha Bar Yaakov interpreted Rav Nachman's response, was get off my back. However, Nofak Dok ve'ashkach, but in fact, Rav Acha Bar Yaakov went out, he did his own research, and he in fact found the Tanya Bagoyla in Monen Elo L'malchi Yevonim Bilvad. That there's a brayso that says that in the Golus they davka count from the beginning of the Greek rule. Ravina says Ravina Masnisan Amideka. We also can infer from a Mishnah in Masechta Rosh Hashanah, the Tanan that we learned in the Mishnah, Bechad Benisin, on the first of the month of Nisan, Rosh Hashanah the Melachim v'Regalim. It is the beginning of the new year for the following two things: for the kings and for the festivals. Right, Pesach is the first festival of the year. So what does it mean that Nisan is the beginning of the year for the kings, and for the Gemara, Amr of Chizda l'shtaris, for documents, that it's considered the new year, right? For documents that if you're counting based on the king, so then it would be considered a new year every Nisan. However, we also learned in a Mishnah Rosh Hashanah that on the first of Tishrei, 6 months later, the first of Tishrei, or earlier, then the first of Tishrei is Rosh Hashanah L'Shanim V'Lashmitin, is the new year for years and for Shmitas. That's when we start counting Shemitah years based on Tishrei. What does it mean for years? That Tishrei is the new year for years? Chizda says, well, it's a new year for documents, that the new year begins in Tishrei when it comes to documents. Kasha, shtaris adod. Well, this is problematic. On the one hand, we said that Nisan is the beginning of the year for documents, but then we said that Tishrei is the beginning of the year for documents. Well, which one is it? Nisan or Tishrei? And we answer, Kan l'malchi Yisrael, Kan l'malchi Ovdei Kochavim. That, well, it depends. The Malchi Ovdei Kochavim Tishrei Maninon, that for the Malchi Ovdei Kochavim, their new year is from Tishrei. The Malchi Yisrael Maninon, Minisa Maninon, and for dating documents from a Jewish king, it would be from Nisan. Ve'onon ha'ashta mitishrei maninon, and we now count from Tishrei. And our documents nowadays, the new year is considered from Tishrei. V'yisakadaitich l'tzias Mitzrayim maninon. And if it would enter your mind that the date is from Yitzias Mitzrayim, well then, Minisan Ba'inon L'Mimnei, then we should be counting from Nisan, Elav Shmamina, L'Malchi Yivona Manina Shmamina. Rather from the fact that we consider the new year to be from Tishrei, it must mean that it is not from Yitzias Mitzrayim, rather it is from the Greeks. We're counting from the Greeks, and that is why we count from Tishrei. So therefore, Rav Acha bar Yaakov's question of, are we counting from the Greeks or are we counting from Yitzias Mitzrayim? The answer is from the Greeks, because the year changes every year at Tishrei, not at Nisan. So the Mishnah had continued that also one of these pagan Yom Tovim is the Yom Ginusya of their kings. The Shaila is, what is this Yom Ginusya of their kings? My Yom Ginusya Shamachem. Amr of Yehuda, says Rav Yehuda, Yom Shmamidin by Ovdei Kochavim es Malcolm. This is Yehuda, that it is the day that the Ovdei Kochavim crown their king. Okay, so I guess the day that the king becomes a Yom Tif. But we have a Braisa in which it says, lists two pagan festivals. One of them is the Yom Ginusya, and the other one is the day that they established that they crowned their king. So that would mean that the Yom Ginusya is not the day that they crown their king. The day they crown their king is a separate Yom Tif. Like Kasha, Hadidei Adivei. So you say, well, no big deal. One of them is a reference to the day that they crown the king. The other one is the day that they crown his son. I think like during his lifetime, and I guess he starts taking on like responsibilities and stuff. What is I'm in the first wide line of Rashi, Ben Melech b'chayav lachziko b'mlucha, to get him, I think like, so he can get the hang of it. Sameach ha'av, the father is very happy, also Yom Eid, and they make it to Yom Tiv. Okay. Fine. Umimukme Malka bar Malka, but do they do that? Would they really make the king's son also a king? Rav Yosef taught that the pasuk says about the Romans, that they don't have, the Romans don't have kings, the sons of kings. That they don't have their own writing and they don't have their own language. Okay. So it sounds like from there that you wouldn't have a king's son also be king. Elamai Yom Ginusya. But if that's the case, then what's the Yom Ginusya? Yom Aleida, the birthday of the king. But Tanya Yom Ginusya v'Yom Aleida. We learn in a Braise, and I think also in our Mishnah as well, we had mentioned the Yom Ginusya as well as the Yom HaLeida. Right? Our Mishnah says, where are we? V'Yom Ginusya Shemachem v'Yom Aleida v'Yom HaMisa. Right? So, okay, but we say we learn in the Braisa the Yom Ginusya as well as the Yom HaLeida. Where am I? So, it sounds like those would be two separate things, that the Yom Ginusya is not the birthday of the king. Lokasha or Didei or Debre. Well, again, we'll say one is his birthday, one is his son's birthday. Both are Yom Tovim. Latani Yom Ginusya Shelo, Yom Ginusya Shel Beno, Yom Aleida Shelo, Yom Aleida Shel Beno. Okay, but this is tricky because we have a Braise in which it says his Yom Genusya and his son's Yom Genusya, his birthday and his son's birthday, which means clearly that the Genusya thing is different than the birthday thing. Ella, my Yom Genusya, what is the Yom Genusya? As we initially had said, Yom Shemamidim Malcolm, it is the day that they crown their king. V'leikasha, what's the deal with the fact that it says Yom Genusya and the Yom that they crown their king? Hadidei Adebrei, so one is his son's. V'ikasha l'achtulo mukmi Malka by Malka. And if you're wondering, but I thought that they don't have kings who are the sons of kings. Ayidei she'ela mukminon. But, well, if they ask special permission, then permission can be granted for such a thing. Kigon Asveris bar Antoninus. For example, Asveris, the son of Antoninus, Demolach, that he was also an emperor. Antoninus le Rebbe. Antoninus said to, sounds like his Rebbe, honestly. Rebbe. We're going to see their relationship. It seems like Antoninus really gave quite a bit of honor and respect to Rebbe. The Roman Emperor Antoninus, which I think is like Antonius Pilus or something, maybe. Antoninus le Rebbe, Bo'ino de Yimloch Asveris Bri Trosi. Antoninus asked counsel from Rebbe. And Antoninus says to Rebbe, I want that my son Asveris should be emperor. Vitis Avid Tveria Kalanyo. And Antoninus also said that he wants to grant Tiberius, which, what does Rashi say about? Okay, Mishum de Isbar Rabbanon. Antoninus answered, okay, because there were a lot of rabbis in Tiberia. And Rebbe, where was Rebbe? Rebbe's buried in a place called Beis Shirim. Where did Rebbe live? Did he live in Tiberia? Where did Rebbe live? I don't know. I think maybe he lived in a few places. Was he in Yabna at some point? I don't know. Anyways, so Antoninus said, and I also want to grant Tiberius sort of forever, like eternal, like you could bestow upon a city that they are free. They don't have to pay any taxes, like forever. Like it becomes a special city that is exempt from a tax exemption forever, a permanent tax exemption. Or Dizavit Tveria Kalanya, that Tiberius should have this tax exemption. Now, if I go to my Congress or whatever, and I say, okay, I want to do these two things, right? One, make Asveris king, right, emperor after me, and two, grant Tiberius permanent tax exemption. They'll do one of them, they won't do both of them. So what Rebbe did was, he brought one guy and he put him on top of his friend, on his shoulders, I guess. And he put a dove in the hand of the guy who was on top. And he says to the guy in the bottom, and he says to the guy in the bottom, tell the guy on top that he should release the dove and let it fly away. Omer Shmamina. So Antoninus interpreted this metaphor, this charade of sorts, to be, this is what Rebbe is saying to me, Ad be'i minayu de asveris bri yimloch trusi, right? Ask from the Congress that they should allow Asveris to be emperor after me, and that they will grant it to you, right? He said they'll grant me one thing, so just ask for this one, they'll grant it. The ema le la Asveris, but then after Asveris has been granted or has been made emperor, will then say to Asveris, decide Kalanya, that he should then request the second request, which is that Tiberius should have permanent tax exemption. And then I guess another time Antoninus says to Rebbe that the senators of Rome, they're giving me a hard time. And every day Rebbe would bring Antoninus to his garden. Kol yoima okrele pugla mimishra kame. And every day, I think, and I think this was at Rebbe's house, as we're going to see more of their relationship soon. So then every day Rebbe would pull a pugla, I think it's a radish, out of his garden. Every day Rebbe would pull another pugla out of the garden. So Amar Shmamina, Achi Ka'amarli, and Antoninus interpreted that to mean At Ktol Chad Chad Minayu V'Litizgaibu B'Chulu. That Antoninus understood this to mean kill the senators, kill them off one by one, but not all at once. Why did Rebbe have to use these, charades of sorts? Why not just tell Antoninus, kill them off one by one? Omar Shame Chashuve Romi Mitzarulet. Well, Rebbe figured that the senators would find out, and that would be bad news for Rebbe. So if he keeps it as like this sort of what's the word that I'm thinking of? This sort of strange. This what's it called when something is like very like strange kind of thing? Enigmatic. If he keeps it like enigmatic, these like enigmatic charades, well then they won't. The senators, if they find out, they won't know how to interpret it. But why not simply whisper it to Antoninus? Because the pasuk says, "Ki ofa shamayim yolich esakol," because the birds of the heavens will carry the voice. That you can't think that you can just whisper something and nobody will find out. But a charade, an esoteric, enigmatic charade is a different story. Antoninus had a daughter named Gira, Isura, and she did something usr. Probably had an affair. Shadale Gargira, so Antoninus sent to Rebbe Gargira, which is rocket. It's like a type of leaf, I think. But Rebbe understood the hint, right? Gargira was a reference to Antoninus' daughter Gira, and that she had an affair. So Shadar le kuzbarta. So Rebbe sent back to Antoninus, look, you have to kill her, Batson. Shadar la karte. So Rebbe sent back to Antoninus cilantro, which is kuzbarta, which means that you have to kill her. So Antoninus then sent back to Rebbe a leek, a karte, meaning a metaphor that, well, she doesn't have any children. If I kill her, then there won't be any more little Antoninuses from her. So shalach lechasa. So Rebbe sent back to Antoninus romaine lettuce, meaning chasa, chus, have mercy on her, don't kill her. Every day Antoninus would send to Rebbe leather sacks full of gold, and at the top of the sacks would be you'd put a little bit of wheat at the top so that you wouldn't see the gold, that they would be filled with gold, right? So the wheat was just to hide the gold. Amar lehu amtiu chite liRebbe, and they would say, go bring the wheat. Go bring this sack of wheat to Rebbe. Omar le Rebbe, but Rebbe said to Antoninus, lo tzuchno, isli tuva. Rebbe said, Antoninus, I don't need the gold. I have plenty of gold. Omar, Antoninus responded, lehave leman debasur, diyave levasroi. And that Antoninus says to Rebbe, yes, but keep it anyways so that it will be generational wealth. You'll give it to your children, and then they'll give it to their children. De asu basuch v'de asu minayu nipuk alayu. So that way your children should have it, and their children should have it, because my descendants are certain to impose levies and taxes upon your children. So like this, at least they have this money that they already have in advance, money to be able to pay those taxes. And there was a sort of like tunnel that would go directly from Antoninus's house, and they would go through this cave to get to Rebbe's home. And every day, Antoninus would be escorted to Rebbe's home by two slaves. And when they would arrive at Rebbe's house, he would kill one of the slaves. And then once they arrived back at Antoninus's house, Antoninus would kill the second slave. I think maybe saw in the article that these were people that were chayiv misa anyways. They're already chayiv capital punishment, and this would be their capital punishment. Interesting. Okay. And fine. And it says, Rashi says, Levesa the Rebbe lilmod Torah. You would go to Rebbe's house every day to study the Holy Torah with Rebbe. It's kind of crazy. Antoninus would study Torah with Rebbe. Okay. So Amalei be'idna da'asina loy nishkach kvar kamoch. And Antoninus said to Rebbe, look, when I come to your house, I don't want there to be a soul there. I don't want there to be anybody else at your house. Yom echad, one day, one day, when Antoninus came, Reb Chanina bar Choma was at Rebbe's house. But then Antoninus says to Rebbe, I thought that I had informed you that when I come to your house, I don't want anybody to be there. Rebbe responds to Antoninus, yeah, but this is not a person. This is not a human being. Avdono digoni above the koim velese. So Antoninus says, okay, so apparently Reb Chanina bar Choma is not a person. Okay, well, how about this? Antoninus challenged Reb Chanina bar Choma, and he says, look, I want you to go to the door and wake up the guy who's sleeping there and bring him over. Now, the guy who was sleeping was dead. That was the slave that was killed at Rebbe's when Antoninus arrived at Rebbe's house. So Antoninus challenged Reb Chanina bar Choma to go and wake up, quote unquote, the guy who's sleeping at the door and bring him over. Also, Reb Chanina bar Choma went and sure enough, he found that this person who was supposed to be sleeping was in fact sleeping forever. He was gestorben. Gehargit. Or Rav Chanina says, uh-oh, this is tricky. What do I do? Rav Chanina bar Choma says, what do I do? If I return and say, the guy's dead. You don't bring back bad news. But if I just leave him ve'ezil and run, that would be disrespectful to the king, to the emperor. What do I do? So Reb Chanina bar Choma prayed, and the guy came back to life. Bishadre, and Reb Chanina bar Choma says, all right, go, and he sent him to Antoninus and Rebbe. Antoninus then said, Omar Yadaina Zute de Izbechu Michai Mesim. And Antoninus then said to Rebbe, I know that even the lowly among you, among the Yidden, are able to revive the dead, but nonetheless, but still, Rebbe, when I come, I don't even want people like Reb Chanina bar Choma, who are not human, apparently. Nonetheless, I don't want anybody to be here. And every day, Antoninus would serve Rebbe. He would bring Rebbe food and drink. Rebbe, when Rebbe wanted to go into his bed to go to sleep, Antoninus would bend over before the bed, and he would say to Rebbe, climb on me to get into your bed. To which Rebbe responded that would not be very respectful to treat the king, the emperor, in such a way. So I shouldn't be doing this, says Rebbe. I shouldn't climb on you to get into my bed. To which Antoninus replied, if only I could be a mat under your feet in the world to come. Antoninus then says to Rebbe, will I have a place in the world to come? Amalei in. Rebbe says, you will. To which Antoninus says, but the pasuk says there won't be any remnant to the house of Esau. That's only for one who does the actions of Esau. But for one who doesn't do the actions of Esau, he can go to Olam Haba. There won't be a remnant to the house of Esau. Yochol lakol, is it possible for all Esau people? Only if they do the acts of Esau. But Antoninus says, but another pasuk says there in hell, Edom is Edom, Esau, Milachea, v'chonesia, its kings and all of its presidents. To which Rebbe says, yeah, its kings, but not all of its kings. All of its presidents, but not all of its ministers. Its kings, but not all of its kings. All of its presidents, but not all of its ministers. When we say it's the kings of Esau, but not all of the kings of Esau, that's because there is Antoninus ben Asverus, right? Antoninus, who was able to go to Olam Haba. All of its presidents, but not all of its ministers, with the exception being K'tir Bar Shalom. K'tir Bar Shalom was a minister who entered into the world to come. K'tir Bar Shalom, what is the story of K'tir Bar Shalom that he goes to Olam Haba? There was a Caesar who hated the Yidden. Surprise, surprise. And the Caesar said to the important people in his kingship, in his empire, if a person has a cyst or like a growth on his leg, you can cut it out and live, or you can leave it there and it'll be in pain. So they said, so the preferred option would be to cut it out and live good, i.e., kill all the Yidden, commit a genocide. Amalu K'tir Bar Shalom, but K'tir Bar Shalom disagrees, and he says to the Caesar, Chada, number one, you won't be able to kill all of them, right? We saw the most successful attempt was about 100 years ago, about 80 years ago, unfortunately, and they succeeded in killing 1/3, I believe, of the world's Yidden, but not all of them. Right, Babylon, we're still doing Babylon Talmud because we're still here. Like the four generations of the sky, like the four directions of the sky, I have spread you out. My comment, what does that mean? If it means that I've spread you out in the four directions, then it shouldn't say like the four directions, it should say in the four directions. Just like it's impossible for the world to not have, I guess, winds or directions, also it's impossible for the world to not have Yidden. And more, and additionally, they're going to call you a bald kingship, a kingship that things are cut out of it with holes in it, because you just cut out the Yidden. To which the Caesar says, well, K'tir Bar Shalom, you seem to be saying good. However, miu called the Zachi l'malka shadule l'kamunya chalila. However, anybody who outsmarts the king needs to be killed. They bury him alive, apparently. Kind of a naktin leiv Oslin, when they were taking him out to be killed in this barbaric way that I guess the Romans were kind of known for, gladiators and such. Amrle ahi matronisa, but a certain matron says to Ketir Bar Shalom, Voy le leilfa de azle michsa, woe is to the boat that goes without paying its tax, its customs, because it won't be allowed in. So here also, she was saying to him that he won't be admitted to the world to come. Nafal al reisha de orlise kota, to which then he somehow removed his foreskin. Omar Yoavis michse chafes vavis. He says, okay, I paid my tax, now I will be allowed in to the world to come. Kikoshadule, when they were killing him, Omar, he says, all of my possessions shall be granted to Rabbi Akiva and his colleagues. Yotzer Rabbi Akiva v'darish, Rabbi Akiva went out and darshaned. Well, where else do we see such a statement? It says by, where does it say? By the Lechem Aponim, right? I think. That it will be to Aharon and his children. Mechza Aharon, half goes to Aharon, Mechza Levanav, and half to his children. So here also half goes to Rabbi Akiva and half goes to the colleagues. Yotzusa Basko v'Omro, and then a voice emanated from the heavens and said, K'tia Bar Shalom, Mizumin L'chaya Olam Haba. That K'tia Bar Shalom is welcomed into the world to come. Bachar Rebbe v'Omar, Rebbe cried and he said, Yesh koine olamai b'shah achas. There is somebody who can acquire his world in one moment. V'yesh koine olamai b'cham shonim, and for others it takes many years. K'tir Bar Shalom, in that moment he acquired the world to come. Antoninus Shimshei Rebbe, Antoninus served Rebbe Adarkin Shimshei Rav. Adarkin, who was also some kind of officer, served Rav. Kishochiv Antoninus Rebbe Nisparda Chavilo. When Antoninus died, Rebbe said, the bundle has unraveled. Kishochiv Adarkin Rav Nisparda Chavila. And similarly, when Adarkin died, Rav said that the bundle had unraveled. We're going to hold it here. There's still a little bit further of this anecdote, but I think we're going to stop here. It was, I think, an interesting daf, the first part of the daf. We continued discussing the dating of documents from the beginning of the Greek rule. We said maybe it could be actually from the beginning, from Yetzias Mitzrayim. Then we talked about the Yom Tiv that the Romans would make when to commemorate the day that the king became king. And that kind of led into a discussion of Antoninus and his son Asverus and the relationship between Antoninus and Rebbe. I hope you enjoy. Peace out.